Hey everyone, MacAndSwiss here, and today we're going to take a small detour from our typical learning schedule, but nonetheless today we are going over a pretty significant topic in Roblox scripting, and that is services. Now, before we jump into it, I just want to say that I will probably be taking a little bit of a break from YouTube and social media in general for personal reasons for a little while. I don't know exactly how long it'll take, but it's just for uh, just to clear my head. I have some other personal things going on, and I want to apologize in advance for that. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So the first fundamental question that we have to answer is, what is a service? Well, a service is pretty much a bundle of properties, functions, and events that seek to help the developers in managing certain parts of their game. For example, you have the player service, which controls the players. You have the data store service, which helps with the data saving, and you have some other miscellaneous services. Now, if I were to go over every single service, sort of like events, I would be here for a very, very long time. So I will instead teach you a little bit about how to find services and how to use them. So I am currently on the Roblox Developer Wiki, and you can go to this page simply by going to the URL up on the top at developer.roblox.com. And the function that we're going to be taking a look at is getService. Now, how you would use this in Roblox Studio is simply by typing, and let me just make this a little bit bigger, by typing in game:getService, and then in parentheses, or in quotation marks rather, the name of the service that you want. So there are a couple that pop up, but there are a ton of services. Like I said, way too many for me to go over, especially just in one video. But once you have identified the service that you want, let's say that we want to go with something simple, like let's say the player service. In this case, the class name of the player service is simply players. What we are going to do is assign that to a variable. So we are going to say local player service is equal to game:getService players. And this is just for our sake. That way we don't have to type in game:getService players every single time. Alternatively, instead of using the game:getService function, some services also have the ability to be called using the dot notation of game. So for example, instead of using player service equals game:getService players, we can say player service is equal to game.players instead, and it will be the same exact thing. However, Roblox typically recommends users and developers to use game:getService as the name of the service itself, so that is what I will be using in this tutorial. Now, I mentioned earlier that services are essentially a bundle of properties, events, and functions which are used to guide developers through a specific part of a game. And this is the case for the player service. So we are currently on the player service page itself on the Roblox Developer Wiki. You can find that simply by typing in the URL up top, or you can just search up players. Make sure that you click on the link that says players and not player, because player is a completely different thing. So as we scroll down the list, you will notice that everything is organized in a sort of list format where it has properties first, then functions, and then all the way at the bottom we have events. And events are typically the ones that we're going to be looking for. So taking a step back at previous episodes, properties are things that are typically stored in variable types. So you will notice that it states the variable type here on the side of it, the name of the property itself, as well as some other additional tags. The read-only tag basically says whether or not you can actually change this property, and the not replicated tag basically says whether or not it will be replicated across the server client boundary. We will go over this in a future episode. So to use any of these, we can simply say, going back into our example, we can say print player service dot, and then the name of the property, and that will give us the value of the property. So if I quickly press run, it says false. And if we go back to the wiki, and if we click into the property itself, you can see that it is a value type of Boolean, and it'll give you a little bit more information. Typically, it will also tell you what the default value is. Functions are a little bit more tricky, and although I did go over functions in a previous episode, the way that Roblox has them implemented is a little bit more tricky than what I went over in the earlier episode. Sometimes the functions can be called simply by using, like what I said before, using the dot notation. If I just say playerservice.chat, but you'll notice that nothing comes up. If this is the case, then typically it will be a colon instead. Now, there is a difference between using the dot notation and using the colon to call functions, but that is some pretty high level stuff that we may or may not go over in a future episode. But for now, just figure out which one it needs. Usually, if you go back to the Roblox Developer Wiki and you go into these individual functions, it will tell you which one it usually uses with a little bit of a code sample right here. So we can see game.players and we see a colon, chat, and then the parameters. Finally, we have the events, and this is what I went over in the previous episode. And events can be called very simply in the same way that I showed you in the previous episode by using the dot notation. So for example, we can take the player added event. Let's go back to Roblox Studio. I can say dot added, player added, and we can connect it to a function. Now let's get rid of this print statement before and after. And it will function as usual. And you can do this with any other event which is in the same service. So we can look at player chatted, and we can call it using the same thing. So player service dot player chatted. And we can use any other ones that we have available. But this week's challenge is going to be another fairly simple coding challenge, and that is just going to be finding a player service, finding rather any service that you want to interact with and printing out a variable, calling a function, as well as connecting a function to an event and running it in your game. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, my name is MacAndSwiss, the most Asian brony on the internet, and I'll see you all next time.